So we want to welcome everybody here again today. Thank you for joining us for our second In Conversation With. We are delighted to be able to introduce you to Kristy Howells. As some of you I know joining us on the call know today, and we'll welcome her as we listen to her insights on all things primary PE. My name's Vicky Randall. I believe some of you know me already. Others and guests, you're very welcome. We have again some international flavour to our event this afternoon, so we love to hear from you all what you're doing. So please use the chat function to say hi, start a conversation with us and each other as we go through today's session. Today we're obviously hosting on behalf of the Primary PE Assembly. We hope you have been able to enjoy the resources and engage with that platform, but today is a conversation, and hopefully it's the first or the second of many, many conversations we will have as a professional network. We were absolutely delighted to have Julia with us for our first In Conversation. Pleased to see Julia's come back. Hopefully no heckling this for Kristy as a second time round attendee, but Julia really set us off last time with thinking about those debates in primary PE, and we had some really lovely reflections following that session. So after discussing with Jez and Kristy as PPEA how we want to move forward with these, we would love to keep the same format where the first half hour we will chat with Kristy and ask her some questions around things that she's currently involved in, her own topics and discussions and debates around primary PE. We will then go into the second half hour, which is over to you guys. So if you could really fill that chat function up with questions you want to pose to Kristy today. It could be anything on what she's discussed, or, you know, Kristy, why not throw some curveballs in there? Anything you want to ask outside of the discussion today around primary PE. Let's see how we can really challenge Kristy while we've got her today on her insights and perspectives. And then a really lovely thing that happened last time was we came off camera, we came off recording, and some people stayed on for a chat. So if you would like to join us at 5 to carry on a very informal chat, we'll stop the recording. We'll be out of formal mode. It would just be lovely to speak to you all on a much more social level and carry on with Kristy and the team and that join us today around primary PE. We'll be carrying on with that at 5. So do stay on the call if you have time to. Okay, without further ado then, Kristy, we'll get going. So to start with then, for those of us who don't know you as well, or for us that do, you have such an amazing range of interests and skills and talents and topics of you're of interest within primary PE. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What drives you? What's your passion? How did you get to be involved in primary PE and all the areas you're connected with at the moment? Who is Kristy and what do we need to know?
Well, where do I start is probably the biggest question. Thank you so much for coming. That's the first thing to say. And so I work down at Canterbury Christchurch University, right down on the south coast of England. We're closer to France than anywhere else, but we are beginning to escape as we've just had Operation Brock lifted. So we can actually now begin to get out of Kent. You'll be pleased to hear we can start to escape. My background originally was sport and exercise science and psychology. I then moved into human movement sciences and biomechanics and looking at rehab and sports therapy. From there, I happened to be teaching and coaching at the same time and did my teaching qualifications and just basically fell in love with physical education and also on the side coaching the GB squad for or some of the GB juniors for rowing, and basically absolutely loved what I was doing, and I had the opportunity in the schools that I was based in to do all the way from reception all the way up to into secondary and A level. So absolutely loved the massive range and how you can develop the child and see how they develop their skills, how they enjoy their passion, how to get children excited about moving. And that is basically my mission in life, is to get people excited and passionate. And yes, I do have a tendency to go a little bit fast when I do get excited and passionate, so you are warned. And I have also been BMXing today, so I'm slightly hyper, so I apologize in advance if I go a little fast.
So Kristy, just at that point, like rowing, I had no idea about rowing. I mean, BMXing, these are what we might call as non-typical fringe activities to mainstream schooling. How have, and you know, in your competitive nature, you've got such, as in you're an athlete. Tell us about your athletic background and where you are now, because not only are you in this world in academia and primary PE, you have another life outside of academia, which is driving that passion too.
So absolutely. So I got injured about 11 years ago now, and through my own rehab I took up cycling, and I absolutely fell in love with cycling and found that I was a little bit good at cycling, and undertook paracycling and paratriathlon. Paratriathlon is really cold when you have to swim in the Welsh canals and sea for the national championships, but that was basically quite good in terms of motivation, because as soon as you go fast, you get out quicker, so you get out of the cold. But thankfully then went to more cycling after triathlon, because I had enough of the water, and then did cycling has so many disciplines. So there's roads, there's time trial, and then I realized that actually I was very small. I got buffeted about by the wind quite a lot, especially on time trialing, and so the indoors was a calling. So in 2014 I had my eye on going for the international paracycling championships, and my wonderful students did a GoFund for me without me knowing, and bought my track bike for me. So my track bike is actually bought by my students, so it's so like precious and amazing, and I still have it today. And I now ride mainly masters, so age related, but still at national level, and podium at national level, and podium at world level as well. I also roller skate, so just for fun. It's awesome in terms of balance and coordination and control. So basically anything with wheels on that I can go really fast on, I am very, very happy on.
I mean, so many people will not necessarily have known that about your background, and we haven't even touched on the sort of academic CV and where your topics of interest are going. That's just a huge.
It's all right, we can stay on cycling, that's fine.
I mean, but I think what I'm getting a flavour for, Kristy, is the fact that I can see through your own tenacity and determination that there really is something for everybody, like regardless of what life throws at you or your varied interests, there is somewhere in the world of moving and the environments that we're in, that there is an activity and a passion that we can help all children connect in. Would you say that's something that resonates with you?
And I think that's one of the important things that we need to question when we're teaching primary PE, as to we need to firstly get with the times and actually look at what are our children doing outside. So if they are scootering, awesome, but let's get them to actually scooter on both sides of their legs, so they're not becoming one side dominant, and then when they come off their scooter they're almost like displacing their hips. We need to encourage them to have that control and coordination on both sides. So the idea of a reception child already deciding that they are left foot forward or right foot forward, or the left foot doesn't work at all on the scooter, because we want to encourage the active travel. So I really want scooters
Yeah.
and skates and skateboards and bikes to be part of everyday life. But we also need to have that awareness of, okay, let's look at that child. Have they got like lopsidedness? And could that be used to their outside world? So we had one of the children in one of our local schools actually had that as a difficulty, in the fact that she scooters all around the estate, see her all the time, she likes to race me, and with the talking with the school and with the mum, it was that awareness of actually she never goes anywhere on her left foot. So actually just getting that encouragement of, you need to do both sides, so you become bilateral rather than unilateral, is really important.
I'd never thought of that, even with the scooters, where we constantly favour a dominant side, where we push off, and okay, for the one or two off times we're playing on this equipment, but if you take part in those activities regularly, that can really seriously have an effect on mechanics or strength or power on one side of the body.
It's the same with
really
having Heelys. So with having Heelys, when children, if you use them a lot and they are your trainers that you have, when you then actually go into running, there's a tip backwards. So in terms of biomechanically, your center of gravity is more further back, and then it's harder for you to run. So having that awareness as a teacher of what else do they do and how do they do it and what is their passion and their love, well great, but let's look at how is it then impacting when we're trying to teach running or when we're trying to teach jumping, for example.
Absolutely. Jez has suggested shopping trolleys on the chat. I don't know if if that's a serious piece of PE equipment. Certainly quite a few in my town that I know might be made use of, but you know,
then
I
it's
think
also having things like having skateboards. So when you know, and even if it's getting used to the idea of stopping, so looking at how do you run down the hill, if we've got like almost like pavement in the, and they're used to controlling themselves, so how are they getting themselves to control, to stop at the end? So it's that body awareness that I want to really encourage with the children and then also with the teachers. But for some of us, it's about not being afraid, and actually it's okay to have some of these amazing alternative items in our schools to actually get them to have a go at, because actually in the national curriculum, well, in England anyway, we have control, coordination, agility and balance as our elements that we're trying to actually teach. It says nowhere that I have to do it in a particular way. If I want to grab those skateboards out, why not?
Absolutely.
Because you'll probably get more balance and coordination on those. Or even like in my primary school, when I do have my primary school eventually, I will have space hoppers. For those of you youngsters in the room, those are basically like big gym balls that you would sit on. And yes, we would have bouncing around the classroom and would have bumping into each other, but my children would be the best coordinated children in the world. And it would really help with our children with special education needs to actually help their core and their posture and their stability in an ongoing daily basis, rather than having to take them out for things like physical activity interventions to help them, rather than actually, if I had a space hopper for everybody to be sitting on and for me to be sitting on, that would help my bouncy level as well, which like I have pedals under my desk and I spend most of the day pedaling just to be able to get rid of some of the energy. This is me not on caffeine.
This is really important that you're raising this, because we talk about travel locomotion skills, balance skills, and manipulation skills in primary physical education, but actually starting to challenge that. If we think about the manipulative skill, we talk about throwing, catching, kicking, striking, but when we integrate all those three movement skill themes together, like you talked about space hoppers or bouncers, when that becomes an extension of the body as a manipulation skill, but is predominantly challenging balance, but equally involves travel and locomotion, you've got this incredible 360 development of movement development, haven't you? Which is where do you think we should be going? Should we be challenging movement then in primary education much more than we are, or do we still look at things quite isolated? Is that, you talked about your primary school one day, is that a vision for what you see for PE?
There's always a dream, isn't there? But I just think it should, movement and physical development is such a key and a center of and it should be a primary area all the way through primary school and into secondary and for all children. We can't just assume that stability skills are developed. I mean, if we look at children coming out of lockdown, we have a lot who, in terms of posture, who were very much more into a leaning over kind of posture rather than being able to sit up and hold themselves up, namely because, you know, they haven't had suitable chairs at home whilst they've either been doing homeschooling, or they haven't been doing as much active transport or active play during the day. So they haven't had that opportunity to be moving and stopping. And then the start and the stop is the really important. It's one of the hardest things to be able to teach in early years, but it's one of the most important to then be helping our colleagues in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. For those of you not in England, that's like moving from 4 and 5 year olds to 5 and 7, and then 7 till 11.
Yeah, because again, add this to these many strings to your bows. You also are very involved in early years and early years physical development, aren't you? And that's, I suppose, the earliest for us as educators that we can really connect with children's, young people's physical development outside of the home is when they move into those early years settings. So how important is it to you that what should the importance be placed on then in the early years for physical development?
Well, there are two main areas in terms of they've just changed the new early learning goals. So we've got brand new ones of really focusing on fine motor skills and gross motor skills, which is fine in terms of dividing the two, but actually we need to connect the two as well. So it's almost, we need another sort of early learning goal of how you are able to put those two together. So how do we actually get foot and eye coordination? How do we get hands and eye coordination? How do we get control, competence in terms of skills, and that creativity? So how do you develop curiosity? So you've got to have exciting movement opportunities for the children to then be curious about understanding their own bodies, understanding space, and not just standing around and knowing that that's space. That's not space. It's about how to move in and out of space and then be creative in terms of how you're going to use that, because then that's going to be awesome when they do get to more gameplay in later on. I mean, just seeing the logic and the process that children go through in the early years is what fascinates me, and it just fills me with joy. Just the just the idea that you have got them from here to here and they're suddenly getting it, or that you are helping support and adapt your equipment so everybody is able to actually access it. So during the pandemic, our children in particular with learning disabilities have been the forgotten voice. So a lot of therapies haven't been able to be accessed, a lot of resources haven't been able to access, and the change back to now going back into school has been really hard for them in terms of just the noise. So it's really thinking about how can we adapt, how can we support all of those chances to be able to move and to be able to continue within what they're doing. So really understanding that actually you are planning for movement a lot of the time in early years. It's just what I spend a lot of my time with my early years practitioners, actually going, this that you've just planned is also movement, and it fits in here to the fine motor skills, it fits in here to gross motor skills, and it combines the two together. It's that raising awareness and also raising the awareness of being able to see. So that's, again, one of my passions, and one of the things that we talk about in particular in the book that Julia and I edited on mentoring teachers in the primary school, is trying to help mentors actually understand to be able to help beginner teachers see. So we can't just assume that everybody's as sporty as the sporty lot, and that everybody can just see movement or see space or understand, okay, if the equipment is, for example, javelins have just landed in that particular way, this is what has happened with the child. So we need to make sure that we are almost going back to teaching basic biomechanics, basically, so everybody can understand and be involved in seeing what's actually being seen. Because I think a lot of the time we have teachers who haven't had the experience of being able to see, which sounds quite obvious, but until we actually say we need more time and space, especially in training, to actually see movements or feel movements, that's really important.
I think going back to your earliest points, there's some comments on the chat here about I don't think anyone is really going to disagree with those important areas you've highlighted, but also highlighted the importance of environments as well, and you know, and developing confidence. And I just wonder how much, say, the COVID pandemic has had on, you know, young people's early years experiences with different environments. You know, I'm as a new mum myself, I'm very conscious of now looking at nurseries and moving to that stage. You know, we've done loads of work at home on fine and gross motor skills and developing that, and the importance of, you know, tummy time and strength development in young children, but only in one environment. I mean, this is, you know, we went to the swimming pool for the first time on Sunday, and that was an overwhelming experience for all of us, actually. But you can, I think that's a really important point. We're going to have some really particular factors in our young generation of children with their development going into the earlier settings. Perhaps are there ones for you which stand out? Sorry, we're going way off here, Kristy.
No,
but I think this is really important points that you're raising and our colleagues are raising today.
I think it's I think the early years have had a slight advantage in the fact that most nurseries have still been able to be open in some formats. So they have had a variety of different environments, whether it be like using the water environment or tummy time or the sand and being outside. But I think we need to turn to, for example, some of our Finnish friends and actually look at what they do. So they take the children skating with adults, so that they will skate from a very early age in terms of actually being with an adult between their legs, and to get that, and they work on the balance and coordination that way. So maybe we just need more roller skates in nurseries. Can you imagine your little one on skates?
We're going
we're going back to
wheels.
There's always going to be wheels and whatever I'm going to plan in my environment. But also they go out in whatever temperature. So it's, you know, changing that mindset. I think we're beginning to change it in the UK a little bit more with having more beach schools and forest schools, in the sense that you do go out, but it's that dressing for the environment. And the guys in Finland, they go down until -17 being outside, and that's just what they do, you know, rather than a little bit of drizzle. And actually, well, we could still put our raincoats on and we could go and use the environment. So we shouldn't have to come indoors because it's raining. We should be able to put on a wet weather gear and go and use the rain, or even like using the snow. So when we had snow in February, what we did in terms of our gymnastics is we turned it into sledge gymnastics. So looking at the shapes that you could actually form on your sledges through the homeschool environment. So some of the local schools then took that on and actually did homeschooling. You know, tasks in terms of PE was to go and have the shapes of the arch and the dish and the straddle and the pike in terms of on the sledge. But it's looking at it and going, right, okay, that is going to be an awesome, again, it's down to speed. So and having that confidence that actually, okay, as long as I teach them how to stop, it doesn't matter what we do on the way down.
Ramon made a good point here, saying we're still very backwards in this respect to the environments and developing children's physical development. And the moment there's a bit of drizzle, we all run for the shelters, don't we? So there's quite a lot we might, you know, we could possibly learn again from our international colleagues or collaborating around those different environments. If it's okay, we can move on. Can I think we've picked up a couple of these points from you already, Kristy, but what then do you see, in leading on from Julia's conversation with us last month, what are the big topics for you in primary PE that you think we need to keep debating? What's out there for you that we're not talking enough about?
So I think the crossover into other areas and actually looking at how physical activity can raise the awareness of PE and the value of PE and the value of moving. How competition is important to actually help children get excited about movement. Yeah, but it's all about having that lifelong and life-wide understanding of how to move, when to move, and what to do to move. So whether or not, one of the big things that we need to keep debating is the use of language. So for example, the National Sport and Recreation new plan adds in the word now recreation. So into the discussion of play, physical activity, physical education, school sports, movements, recreation. So firstly, we all need to just talk the same language. That would be really useful. We're making it more complicated to our teachers, to our practitioners. We do need to know the differences between when we are educating children physically and when we are doing activities that happen to be physical activities. So we do need to have the divide between the two, but we still need to have a big push to actually having more of a culture of movement. So we don't actually, that will help in general and help our generation inactive. We had approximately a fifth of children were not meeting the minimum physical activity recommendations in a day, even though on a school day they should be able to. Great new work has just been published on the fact that they can, from Howells and Coppinger, 2021. But it's really important that actually it is possible, because there are movement opportunities within a school setting. If you're looking at the amount of movement that can be done around the classroom, the amount of movement that is available at break time, at lunchtime, and during PE. So we need to have that encouragement of getting up and moving.
So do you think we've been a bit precious in our own spaces then, and not kind of working across our different movement cultures and areas? I mean,
I think we need to just learn from each other. So there's lots of people that we can learn, like from the health education guys. So we have nicely in England a brand new curriculum, which is just kind of slightly snuck in, which is beautifully and called relationships, sex education, and relationships and health education. In health education, there is a real focus on physical activity, diet, nutrition, mental health, physical health, and all comes into this idea of moving. So the other big push that I would say in terms that we need to debate is the understanding of the importance of fluids. So it's all about making connections and actually not being afraid to go and talk and learn from somebody else, because we're always learning. So my other big push would be to get really understanding fluid intake. So from our work that we've done, we've found that children, in particular 4 and 5 year olds, but everybody under 7, but in particular 4 and 5 year olds, don't understand what they should be drinking or when they should be drinking, and they will often just prefer to go and play rather than actually have any fluid intakes. So we need to develop habits. We can't just assume that our children know when to drink. We've found that children have about a 45-minute delay in terms of getting thirsty. So we need to teach them when to drink. Oh, after lunch you need to drink because you've been running around. So they get used to this habit forming, and it's something it's forgotten. It's a one line in our new governor's guidance. It's not even in the curriculum. The governor's guidance says that we need to encourage children to drink more, but it doesn't tell us how much, it doesn't tell us when, it doesn't. So there's a lot of pressure on teachers. So I think we need to help as educators to share that information of, okay, right, this is what health education needs to tell us. This is what nutrition tells us. This is what physical activity is telling us. This is what physical education is telling us. And we need to come together as a collective. So I just like happy connections, happy families.
I mean, that's really interesting. I certainly haven't thought of these sort of, apologies for this term, these sort of satellite topics that surround us as a physical education professional. And you're quite right. I mean, we can't work in isolation without at least having knowledge or understanding or consideration to these other factors that are hugely important in that child's experience of movement. So something simple like drinking, that something aware of the weather or the environment, or
Absolutely. I mean, teachers don't even know how much they should be drinking, and when they should be drinking. And most of our teachers that we spoke to, we spoke to about 250, don't drink enough, and then they don't role model to the children. And often they don't allow them to drink in the afternoon. Because they feel that the children should have had a drink at lunchtime. And then the problem is one or two of our children actually said that they were worried because they weren't allowed to drink and they weren't sure if they were going to make it to the end of the day. And so when we asked them a little bit more, the children actually said that they knew if they didn't drink, they were going to die. So from a mental health perspective, if we are not letting the children drink, the snowball effect of us then actually not allowing that's then what the children are thinking about, and that's their constant worry. And it's being that awareness of, okay, what are the consequences in the teaching that those teachers had done with the children? The thing that they remembered was that they needed to stay hydrated. Hydrated was really important for living, make sure you didn't die, and that's what they held on to.
I mean, that's really powerful messages coming from the young people. I've just finished a paper with a colleague who did a study on physical activity and in primary schools as an intervention strategies. And from those findings, we were that children were actually using toilet breaks as break-up times in the classroom, as times to break up sedentary time. And as we know as educators, that it's not just meeting the physical activity markers, it's also lessening the amount of time you're sedentary. And even, I mean, the children had understood ahead of maybe some of their teachers or adults that, that connection between if I drink more, then I need the toilet more, then I can move more. And they'd had this whole strategy and game plan. It was absolutely remarkable how much strategy they were putting to using fluid, toilet and sedentary behaviour to break that up. Really interesting stuff. I'm very conscious of time, and there is one more question before we kind of bring this together and have a look at some questions. So folks, if you've got any questions for Kristy you'd like to put to her, please pop them in the chat as we go now. But you've mentioned you've just finished, it's just recently published a book with Julia on mentoring in primary education. So I couldn't leave today without asking, there we go, great text. And obviously physical education is a chapter in that book, and it's an edited book around all of primary education. So with your your primary physical education hat on now, we know in schools that expertise and the ability to work and mentor with trainee teachers is a really hugely important contribution to preparing teachers into the profession, whether they're at pre-service level or going into early career stage as teachers, and throughout, mentoring colleagues throughout the kind of life course of their career. What's the sort of take-home messages then from you around mentoring in primary PE that we need to be more aware of if we're in that mentoring role, or if we're in receipt of mentoring? You touched on a few things already, but
so one of the things that I would definitely suggest is getting the beginner teacher, if you were mentoring the beginner teacher, to actually look at what are they teaching in terms of the ways in which the children are learning. So is there a practical, a cognitive and a social aspect to actually what is being taught? And then the second part of that is to actually tell the children. So there's often the planning might be there, and they might have planned it all out as a teacher, but actually getting the children to understand that this is our social element that we're doing, and this is our cognitive element, and this is our practical element. Also, I would want to mentor about, in particular, articulating. So getting the children to look at different ways to articulate how they understand physical movement and how it actually is occurring. So in the book, we talk a lot about the use of choreography and the use of actually drawing. So it's accessible for all, and then using the plans and the maps to actually then do the dances again. So to look at different, whether you use whiteboards or you use photography and you match the photos together, to actually then look at we still need the next generation of choreographers, we still need the next generation of photographers, we still need the next generation of analysts. So it's about looking at the wider elements of how are you planning for all of that in your PE lessons, as well as just teaching PE. But the other big thing in terms of mentoring with the beginning teachers is to really help them try and break down movement. So I touched on it a little bit earlier in terms of one of the biggest things that we found with some of our trainees is the being able to understand movement and looking at ways to break it down so it's actually easier to see, and then also then easier to then assess, and also easier then to say next steps. So if we're looking at, this is why my sort of biomechanics kind of drifts into most things that I read, so this kind of makes sense to people if you're picking things up again now, that actually we have body parts, so head, body, arms and feet. What are you observing in terms of the skill? Is it what you were expecting? What would you change? How would you challenge them next? So that's the third item that I think is really important as a take-home message is to identify those transferable skills. So where you might be doing a PE lesson through gymnastics and you're looking at challenge and stability and timing and fluidity, that's a really bad word to use. Flow, that's a better word.
Because we've been talking about fluid and water.
I know, I tried to put them together. Flow and like body tension. It's then looking at, okay, how am I using that in the same child when we are then doing athletics, or we're then learning through football, or we're learning through new age curling, or we're doing sitting volleyball. I'm still having all of those elements, but we don't highlight it enough to the children when we are actually teaching it. So it's about making sure that we plan for it so we can talk about it, so the children can then see, oh, when we're all doing sitting volleyball, actually this is all about collaboration and competition and balance and stability, and actually getting that shuffle on, which is really hard. And then it's about realizing, okay, this is then what we're doing over here, and that takes time and practice to be able to do it on an everyday basis. And I guess the fourth take-home message is just to get excited about it. So you might have noticed that bit. So even if you absolutely if they don't like it, it's the moment that you've got to try and inspire them. So you've got to put a little bit of you into it to get get your passion across.
So are you speaking as the mentor saying this to the teacher who's being mentored, or are we saying this about the person who's delivering to the children? Both. Or even are we giving these messages to the mentor? I mean,
well, let's go all three, because as an educator, I need to help support the mentors. This is what I'm trying to do. Then the mentors are then doing this with the beginner teachers. I'm also then having done this with my beginner teachers as they've gone through with me. But then also all of that still needs to be transferred to the children. We can't just have this secret club that just the teachers and the mentors know about. The whole point is to then be able to share it with the children, so they really become that E part of the physically educated.
Yeah, Kristy, it's such a broad range of topics we've discussed, and I know we've gone past the half hour.
We haven't even done aquatics yet either.
Oh, we haven't even got you on aquatics. No, I mean that's going to have to be, I think, for another day, unless we're stuck with questions. But I mean, from my point of view, just to bring this all together, I think what you've shared with us today, possibly things that might ordinarily get missed off, get just ignored or overlooked or not even considered, and actually tied into physical education. They're really, really important topics, or have the potential to be hugely impactful when working with young people. On the chat, we've had lots of people in that conversation around wheels talk about how they've started to purchase, items where they can challenge that, and I guess there's issues around safety and are children going to hurt themselves, but we've at some point got to overcome that, haven't we, and got to apply our safe practice principles to increasing children's challenge, because otherwise we're going to be stumped with their development. So lots of people on the chat talking about, I think the wheels topics really got ignited an interest there. but also as you take a drink there. And I did make sure I brought a cup of water because I knew we'd be talking with yourself. You know, the importance of fluid and understanding those wider areas that impact that child's development, and you know, are we going to get the best from our young people if we're not modeling or encouraging them to think about what their body is in terms of health, and whether you sit on the campus, PE is health and well-being, or PE is not part of health and well-being, or wherever that is, we can't deny that the health and well-being of a child is going to be hugely important to that child's access to physical education.
I think we have to talk about it in that sort of movement culture kind of language of being all one, and that it helps towards health and well-being, especially if there are our Scottish friends and our Welsh friends heading more into health and well-being. It needs to be, and also the contribution for the recovery curriculum of play and physical activity and physical education really helping the health and well-being of our children. So
can I pick up on a few strands that I've noticed Ramon's posted on the chat? And there's sort of a theme, I think, to some of his topics. And Ramon, please correct me on the chat if I've missed that incorrectly. But he's been thinking about connections. And, you know, earlier on there was a post about what other colleagues in school to develop that movement culture and language should we be working with much more. And then in the second post, he just put making connections to not have PE topics and modules taught in isolation. So it builds on that point you've just made about our colleagues in Wales and Scotland and in other parts of the world. You know, I guess there's a question for here, who should we be spending more time working with in the school environment? And where should that curriculum be going so we're not in isolation? What would you like to see happen there? Well, hopefully I haven't done your questions and comments a disservice there, Ramon, but if that's okay, Kristy, to have a think about that. What do you think?
Well, our first friends that we need to go and talk to immediately are our SENCOs, so our special education coordinators, to fully understand our children's learning needs, and then look at what adaptations need to be made to then make sure that they can effectively access our PE lessons and not be left out, and to also raise awareness. So one of my year threes at the moment is currently looking at visual impairments and how to promote visually impaired strategies within PE lessons, which is particularly close to my heart because I forgot to mention that, but you know, we'll add it in. I occasionally pilot a tandem on the track, so just the understanding of the different ways. There are like 9 different ways in which we can actually engage with children with visual impairments, but it's trying to really understand what is the best way, what do the children actually like, so that would be our first protocol, I would suggest. Our second protocol is our new wellbeing coordinators. So in England in particular, they are new roles in terms of wellbeing coordinators, and looking and working together with them in particular with the coming back after lockdowns, how is movement and physical activity interventions and then PE being used to actually help social interactions, and then look at the physical and the health elements as well. And then it's the slight unknown moment. So in England, in design and technology, they have a big focus on diet and preparing meals, but actually that falls also into health education. So it's who's looking after health education? If it's got the physical activity and mental health element, it has a tendency to drift towards being within PE. But it's how can we really ensure that it's done effectively, not actually done like as a add-on.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Some really interesting points coming in. Ali sort of asked about a question around policy, and what would you change if you could about policy, re-emerging policy, current policy? You know, what would you want to see changing to impact our primary PE in schools more?
Well, the first thing that needs to be done is more funding for our children with special educational needs. They have, as I've mentioned before, been the forgotten ones within the pandemic, and for them, more one-to-one time or more support is actually needed, or just more equipment that is suitable to them is needed to be accessed within school. And there doesn't seem to be as much funding, and also out in the community. So a lot of the community access has been dropped. One of the ones that I retweeted on Twitter recently was the disabled football had actually been cancelled within the local authority because they didn't have any funding for it. But actually it's like, well, where is that social connection and that physical movement going to occur now for those individuals and athletes? They're just left with nothing, rather than actually that shouldn't be the case. They should be supported like everybody else.
If we're truly advocating for an equitable and equitable culture for movement, there needs to be equity. And I remember the issue with the FA only allowing their elite boys teams to come back to training, and there were issues with the girls teams and other groups of children within football that weren't allowed to come back, and there was all sorts of tension around that. So there's lots more there to still challenge.
So, for example, the Tour of Dubai was only male this year rather than male and female as it normally is, and the females come do the day before. The reasoning behind it was COVID, but it was all right for men to go. So it's that approach and differences. It's equality on many different levels. But the other big policy shift would be a increase in the value of PE. So it's a statutory requirement. So actually, let's give it the value that it's needed, and that's in particular towards teacher training. So there needs to be an increase on statutory number of hours that trainees do, because you've got such a breadth and depth of knowledge that's needed. And we're expecting our beginner teachers and our later teachers to still have and absorb all this knowledge somehow. So I would increase the number of in teacher education, and I would also increase the number of accessible opportunities in terms of CPD for teachers in PE.
And perhaps we need to move to a much more joined up model there around, and maybe in England, where we have this new early career framework, we need to be thinking more about how we join up our pre-service teacher education to our in-service teacher education. So, you know, our teachers aren't just moved from one isolated sector into a completely other different sector that doesn't consider where they've been and where they're coming and where they're going to. Interestingly, there was no mention there about throwing more money into PE. Perhaps as a policy, especially within England, where we've had so much, we've almost been saturated. Maybe that as a policy move hasn't necessarily brought some of these topics further ahead as we'd have liked. So maybe it's not necessarily a monetary issue anymore, unless the money is funding some of these important areas directly that you're talking about. Is that how you'd want to see money redistributed in policy? Sorry, popping you on the spot there again.
I think it needs to be slightly more accountable in terms of how and where is it being used, and we're looking at, you know, almost like impact case studies for every school to then look at how it's being used to help upskill our teachers, our individuals, because it's changing year on year from every child that's currently come through. In, you know, there should be a massive influx in our early years provision funding, because as you say, with your own child, you haven't had that social engagement or the physical development that some families may or may not have been able to access because of, you know, double parents working from home. So it's that we need to also almost have a funding pot for our early careers teachers who have qualified this year and last year during a pandemic, so that they continue to access sessions run by experts to help support them. That would be,
I mean, we won't get into that now, but I guess that's a whole infrastructural landscape that falls behind that as well. That you know, that's quite that's a complex area. But I think at times you're right. We need to start to use policy to address we don't need to be afraid of complexity in this area. And that, going back to that point you said about working across boundary crossing and really talking to other areas and sectors that have that stakeholder within PE is how we move forward. I just wanted to pick up some points in the chat here if I can, Kristy. So Dominic says, you know, going back to your point earlier, movement in PE, especially for SEN, we need to focus on more functional movement for everyday living, as well as being able to focus on sport and physical activity. Is that something you would really advocate for as well? It seems seems a really important point.
Well, we talk very much about lifelong and life-wide physical activity in terms of getting that movement going. So you need to look at, you know, just being able to move and function and revisit all those movements again and again and again, not just at high-level sports. So absolutely, Dominic, we definitely need to do that, and we need more. That's where we need the more time, we need more space, we need more funding to then help support that to be effective in our schools.
And absolutely, and Katerina here says, you know, talks in particular about initial teacher education for pre-service teachers, that yes, there's things we need to make maybe mandatory in terms of the provision in the training course, but also making it mandatory on placements. Perhaps that's an area that needs to be really developed, especially for things like, I guess, the development of our knowledge to develop the language. You talked about the importance of language and movement culture. How are we, you know, to expect our teachers to be able to develop that language repertoire to teach, and then to teach our young people?
Well, it's not normal to be talking about, oh, that was brilliant in the fact that you went in a forwards direction in a zigzag motion. You don't talk like that, but you've got to talk like that when you come into a PE lesson, because, and especially from an earliest perspective, we need to tell them, and we need to get them to understand what are they doing and how are they doing it, so they learn the movement that they're doing. But as a teacher and a practitioner, you need to then also get into that mindset that is what you are saying. It's like learning another language. We need to have movement vocab and movement, and then with that, how to foster questions using our movement vocab. So getting the idea of developing movement opportunities, movement questions, that all comes down to but that needs more time, you know, with everybody. Come back.
Definitely, you're right. And I suppose pedagogically, but also in terms of language, we need to develop the skills of each and every subject. And it's too much to ask of our teachers to deliver quality physical education if they've never had the opportunity to see it. And like you mentioned, the mentoring, to be able to have that conversation with another colleague about, well, what are you seeing? What are you noticing? What didn't you notice that I noticed, and vice versa. And we can't expect our teachers to do that unless they're teaching. And we know from Julia's discussion with us last month, there are whole reasons why that's possibly not happening. But there's some really interesting stuff on the chat coming through now. I'm struggling to keep up now. So there we go. Let me just scroll down, because I don't want to miss any of these. So talking about mentoring, Ange mentions that in her experience in mentoring beginning teachers as well as experienced teachers who have had their PE switch flicked on once they understand PE's relation to its wider role in primary education. She uses the term the kind of holistic approach to teaching PE, and once they understand that, then so many barriers around it start to get removed, and as we connect to other subject areas. So she's making the point there that we need to make connections within PE and understand the place of the physical within the education of the child. You know, I guess that's an important point for mentoring as well, an important role of the mentor to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's have a look through. Oh yes, and Gerald just replies back saying the barriers may well be the physical, but the problem is that for many the physical just becomes the busy happy good. So, you know, seeing the physical as more than just the moving, it has an important educative role as well. Ramon talks here about, I'm not sure about the system in the UK, but in Malta, greetings from Malta, Ramon, that students with statements of needs are assigned to learning support educators either on the one-on-one. Oh, I've lost it there. It's just pinged away as something else has come in. Oh, I don't want to miss that point, Ramon. Sorry, I'm skipping back now to find your lovely comment you've put there. Here we go. They have one-on-one, but unfortunately in training they do not touch on this on the training and collaborating with PE teachers and how to adapt the PE lessons, and which is such a pity. So he was saying how he'd love to have an assistant with him that specialises in PE and PA to be able to include all the students. So you've got that real collaboration between the one-on-one support with students with specific learning needs and the teacher and the educator. That's surely the ideal. I mean, we have an opportunity for that in the UK, don't we? But sadly, my experience is that those teaching assistants or learning support assistants are removed from the PE lessons to do other things. We need to address that, surely.
But I think, as many people are saying, we need to continue it together to keep raising the awareness of PE in general, and then also keep raising the value of PE within initial teacher training as well, to then help support better understanding of what is PE and now the wide reach that it is, and almost like the wide responsibility that it's beginning to have. And I think if we recognise the wideness of it, I think that's going to help then us push the value of it, which will then help us grow in a variety of different directions.
Yeah. Geth, thank you, Geth. Yes, opportunities during IT are varied indeed. Hopefully we've got a paper coming out about this soon, and I think this is really important point to make, because surely at ITE this is the place where we can really set our stall, really importantly drive those messages around the importance of physical education. Hopefully, if we get them plus alongside the experience to teach and the dedicated time, we can start to develop the workforce that are also flying this flag, rather than feel like we're backpedaling all the time to go, oh, now we've got to talk to the profession about why it's important. If we could get that at the pre-service level, then hopefully that's half our battle done, really. And connecting those thinkings.
We also
Julia
need to think
says,
about what can we learn from other people and other things. So, for example, from the gaming community, games are really addictive, especially for children. So, what can we learn from them that we can then make our movement culture more exciting, more accessible, more interesting? That's then what the children want to do. So we need to question and not be like, oh, like this is like, there should be like no good or bad sort of thing. It should be like, okay, well, what can we learn from them? That clearly attracts everything. That's what they want to go and do. So how can we get that social connectedness, by talking to each other on their headsets? Okay, how can we have that in our PE or in our physical activities? So actually using real life video games. I like that, Ramon.
And Emma's been looking at that. I think there's possibly a conversation to be had with Emma about that. She's just been, I've been looking at that as well, and these wider connections. Julia's therefore mentioned a point about, should we start to have a conversation about how we can raise the value of PE during ITE? There is a danger, she says, of us now starting to outsource teacher education within PE. We've seen the outsourcing at school level. We're now seeing a precedence for outsourcing physical education at teacher education level as well, which is a really interesting next move, that teacher educators in PE are starting to become kind of possibly extinct by outsourcing it to other providers. Can we nip that one in the bud?
I'm not going anywhere.
You've got to wheel you out, have we? You're going to chain yourself. Okay, well, we're just trying to see if there's any final comments there. The gamification's got a bit of interest there, and lots of topics raised. Chris, I think we'll bring it to a close there, Kristy. We've just hit 5 o'clock. Hopefully some of these conversations will continue if you're able to stay online and talk to colleagues who are able to hang around for a bit. Are you around to chat for a bit longer? Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today. And we sort of stayed on track, didn't we? We went a little bit off, but we always knew that was going to happen. For me, I'm going to be thinking about putting wheels on everything. I'm going to go and try it on my 7 month as we go downstairs. I'm not sure if I'm going to have the okay by his father to do that, but hey, have a little bit of get them young, as we say. Thinking about those boundary crossings, how we can connect to maybe topics or areas or stakeholders that we haven't currently thought about, as you mentioned, the importance of water and nutrition and fluid intake, not necessarily to teach it but the importance of it as an educator generally, perhaps wherever you sit with that. Language, the development of language, and how we must develop those skills and understanding, and the importance of language or shared language and commonality. And finally, in terms of mentoring, helping us as mentors, as teachers being mentored, or as young people to notice, to observe, to become aware of what we're seeing and how we're seeing movement, and even I guess at some level, even if it's just to start by describing what we're seeing. And that would possibly help with our language as well, and our shared language use across whole school. Absolutely. Kristy, thank you so much. I, for one, are really wanting to carry on this conversation with you in a minute, but for colleagues that have to go now, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us again this afternoon. Please do log back in. We have another May event at the end of May with Gerald Griggs, and we'll be talking about all sorts of things and interesting topics that are coming up in the new text of Introduction to Primary PE, but also a few little gems that Jez will always throw into that conversation as well, and interesting topics around his thinking around physical education in the primary sector. But for now, I'm going to stop the recording and wish you all a lovely day, and do stay on chat if you have time to this afternoon. Kristy, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.